Welcome to Richer Soul, Shawn Nowotnik. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you for having me here. It's a wonderful experience to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you. We always started at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, that's interesting. So I can tell you this is a kind of a funny story, and you could never do this today, but I learned about money from my grandfather actually. So I grew up in Chicago in a poor neighborhood, and where there was corner grocery stores is where you get your items from. And my grandfather sent my older brother and I was probably about 4 years old when I first really came to the concept of money and the benefits of it and the power of money. And he sent a note on my pinned to my shirt to get him a bottle of beer, two white owls, and that we could spend the change on candy. So we walked down to the corner store, and that's when my first introduction to like, oh, this is how money works. Okay, you give people money, they give you stuff that you want. This is wonderful, and that was from my grandfather. And then he ran a fish market, so I got to little experience with business wise. So, you buy product, you resell it, you mark it up, and people get goods that they want. So that was my first introduction to that.
That's funny because if you did that today, he'd be arrested for letting a 4-year-old walk down the street. They would have carded you at the store, right? They wouldn't have given you anything. It was a very different time. People don't realize how much freedom they have lost in a sense. Did the store owner know your family?
Yeah, so back in the old days, I don't know how it is now in the city, but in the old days, everyone knew everyone. In fact, everyone down the street, that was the version of social media, was watching it live, right? This was not, we didn't watch on phones and we didn't have computers back then. Everyone was, looking at everyone else's business out their front window or they're on their porch and they're watching. So they know if you're up to no good or you're up to good. And yeah, the store owner knew my grandfather very well. So I don't know if it's just some random kid showed up to the neighborhood that would have a transaction of that nature, especially a teenager. So as a 4 and 5 year old, my brother and I, that was perfectly harmless to them.
Curiosity, did your neighbors scold you when you misbehaved?
Yeah, so that was a thing. Well, actually, yes and no. So they would scold me, but they didn't need to because I know if there was a couple times where I was kind of on the fence of being in trouble. And the neighbor would say, I don't want to have to tell your parents. And I was like, oh, wow, this is serious. So, the neighborhood watched out for the neighborhood, right? So, or they'd say, hey, we're keeping an eye on you. What are you doing over here in the alleyway? What are you up to? And so, yeah, it was the community, right? We were raised by the community. And I think it was a wonderful experience.
I don't think we do that well, I doubt we do that anymore. For a greater part, I know in our neighborhood, we knew all our neighbors' kids. And so people are watching out, but probably not to that extent in that kids didn't have that much freedom to just go at will anywhere they wanted.
Yeah, I think it's kind of sad nowadays because I actually seen it was one of the southern states where a mother was arrested for letting her like 8 year old walk home like a half a mile. And I was thinking, where I live and when I grew up, you were allowed to walk up to a mile to school because that's where the bus lines started outside of a mile. So we walked. And now it's a crime, like, to let, I mean, it was not freezing weather. We're talking about 75, 80-degree weather, right? And how is this a crime? And it was just, I loved the adventure of being a kid, being able to kind of run wild again with the community keeping an eye on us that we weren't causing any real trouble, but there was a lot of adventure to be had and a lot of learning.
I walked to school too in, I guess it was third grade, or walked home in third grade. So I was relatively young, and we walked to Boy Scouts. And yeah, you would go places, and it was no big deal. It's a shame. We've forgotten how to let kids be kids.
Yeah, yeah. And then when I moved to the suburbs, it was even more interesting because I called it the country. I didn't know that the suburbs, I thought it was, the country living because there was actually some farms and some woods and stuff. And it wasn't all just, concrete buildings and in high rises. And oh boy, the adventures there were just amazing. You leave in the morning and just be back in time before the sun comes down or before dinner, or your mom's yelling your full name. That's when I knew I was in trouble. If my mom said my middle name, I'm in trouble. That's it. Like, it's getting serious now. I better scoot home really fast.
I'm guessing you didn't need a watch, you just looked at the sun?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, or you just ask somebody, or in some areas there'd be like the banks used to always have like the time and stuff like that. So if it's just like, oh, you got to be home at 4, you look at a restaurant or a bank, and they had the time always ticking out in front of the building.
That made it easy. Did school teach you anything about money?
I wish it did. No, and in fact, I won't go on too much of a rant here, but I wish schools actually did teach children about finances, money, taxes, how interest rates work. These are really important because it's everything in our life is based on these things, and we don't teach it. We're still on this model where we're all going to factories, line up a certain way, do this, do that, and they're not teaching things that are really important. And I don't understand why, because we all have to use money. We all have to save money. We should be saving money, and we should be earning money, and we should understand the value of it and also the cost of acquiring goods and loans and stuff of that nature, and what it's actually really costing us.
I will say, I haven't used the quadratic equation in almost 40 years. I don't do sine and cosine, and I don't write book reports, right? But yet they don't teach you how to story tell. They don't teach you how to be happy. They don't teach you how to look at your emotions, and they don't teach you, like you said, all the things about life, basic money, taxes, comparison shopping, right? Or how to not get sucked into media and all of those types of things. And I think that's a big problem because it's amazing how many kids I see at a very young age stuck on a screen. And I'm like, they're done. It's over. Like, too bad for that kid.
Yeah, we lost another one. That's what I think when I see we just lost another one. Unless they get grounded from that device or they drop it in the water, they'll have some freedom for a little bit. Yeah, and the sad thing about that is, see, life doesn't have algorithms. Like, we just go out and experience life. Whatever is happening happens, right? But when we get on these devices, there's these algorithms. We just keep seeing the same stuff fed to us over and over, and it reinforces very specific ideas or items to us. And then we get stuck in that loop. And how do you grow, and how do you learn, and how do you expand from that? You don't. You're
Unfortunately, you are.
yeah.
So you grew up and you got into making films and you were quite successful at that. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, so actually I started as a talent agent. So what happened is, I'll just jump real quick. I started playing guitar as a teenager because I got hurt playing football, couldn't play football any longer. Started a band, didn't know anything about music. I learned quickly because at this time, all these bands were breaking out, and they told me my band was alternative. I didn't even know what this term meant. What I'm alternative? I thought I was like rock and roll, punk, maybe hard rock. And they're like, no, your band's alternative. Like, we want to sign you to a deal. I was like, what? I've only been playing this instrument for like I don't even know how to read music. I don't even know what chords I'm playing. So I got into a recording studio, and I learned the ins and outs of, what production people do, what managers do, because I would run into all these really big bands coming out of Chicago and ones that were recording in the studios where I was at. And I got a real taste of how things are produced, right? Everything down to the artwork for the packaging and the marketing of it. And unfortunately, I was dropped from my record deal before my record actually came out. So, life lesson, right? So here I am. I'm working in a steel factory because I come from a blue collar family. So I knew how to weld. I knew machining. I grew up with this stuff in my garage, and I needed to make some money. And I figured, well, if I'm going to make money, I might as well make the most money and go into a trade while I figure out what's next. So I absolutely hated it. It's not that I'm better than that kind of work. It just wasn't fulfilling to me. I mean, a windowless building that's 100 and some degrees in the summer while you're trying to weld was not exciting. It was a miserable experience. And a lot of people there weren't happy with what they were doing. I said, I got to get out of here. And I had this idea, like, why don't I use my knowledge from the music industry? I love Hollywood. It's got to be very similar. Like this, blissfully unaware how complex the system really is, and just how, So I just tell the listeners out there today, it's okay to be blissfully unaware sometimes, because you will do things that normally you would be afraid to do. And if I knew how insane this idea was, I would never have done it, but I was, again, blissfully unaware. And I was like, I'm just going to fly to Hollywood. I'm going to go make some connections. I'm going to start a talent agency. So this was the opportune time because this is about 97, 96, 97. The internet was just really coming into people's homes. People were starting to believe the internet was maybe possibly going to stay around. But a lot of the big agencies, talent agencies, were thinking the internet was a fad. So they weren't approaching the internet like I was. And I decided to start a one-stop shop. So it was going to be actors, models, musicians, graphic designers, everything you need to produce anything creatively. And that's how I got started. And from there, I segued into doing contract work with other people, including a really dear friend of mine who got me into working on record albums and doing artwork for and props for bands. And it was through him that I became a Grammy member. And I had made so many acquaintances. So one of the goals of my talent agency, which didn't work out, was you talk about money. I was like, I really wanted a talent agency, but also I had this vision of, well, maybe one day I can have an IPO and sell this thing. And, this is the gold rush of the internet. We're talking about, 90s. So this is, I'm hearing people just making this ridiculous money and people making deals. And I was like, well, I got to get some of this. Well, like the music thing, I did all right in the talent agency thing, but it didn't work out to have an IPO. And I segued into producing movies and marketing movies, and then also becoming a celebrity liaison. So I would travel almost like what I'm doing right now, but back in the day when people would physically always be at the studio, right? So I would travel with them to sit in the green room or sit in the hub where they're doing the interviews. And I would travel with them, and I'd kind of be their kind of gatekeeper of what questions could or couldn't be asked and kind of prep everything. And it was a wonderful existence. That's my introduction to Hollywood. And yeah, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. It was about 17 years I spent traveling between Chicago and Hollywood to do the work.
Question about that.
Sure.
Are all these celebrities happy or are they miserable? Or does it vary?
So that's a great question. And of course, I can't answer for every celebrity, which I know you know this, but the ones, and I met hundreds, probably had interactions with at least 1,000 celebrities, probably the biggest names you could imagine in the industry. I had met and I had an opportunity to speak to and spend time with, or attend award shows or work with, or some way or the other. And one of my big misconceptions was that everyone would be happy, especially those that had a lot of money or had a lot of prestigious awards. And I quickly learned, thankfully, I was befriended by quite a few actors, and especially some of the older generation of actors, the golden age of actors and that. And they had told me, like, Shawn, no, the Oscar or the Grammy, not that it's not a wonderful experience, but that's not the end all. That's not going to make you happy the rest of your life. And I was thinking, you guys are crazy. You guys, you as they sit there with the shelf full of them, and I'm telling them they don't know what they're talking about, and they're the winners of these awards. And it took me a while. I kind of half listened, like, okay, yes, I respect what you're saying, but I disagree because when I win one, it's going to change my life. I don't know about you guys, but I'm gonna I'm gonna win the right way, and it's going to make me happy and change my life. Well, I found that it doesn't make them happy. And there's a lot of really sad and dysfunctional people in Hollywood. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in the reality of human nature is you have a lot of people who are isolated because they have so much money. People only want to speak to them, talk to them, to get something, to sell them something, to acquire something, whether it's some of their fame or their money or stuff of that nature. So they have to really isolate themselves, and they have to question everyone who meets them. What is this authentic or not? Right? Why do they want to befriend me? And so a lot aren't happy, and that's why we see a lot of addiction, right? Like just like we see with the general public, the same thing, right? We have addiction and we have other unhealthy coping mechanisms because people aren't happy, and some of that goes back to, and we could talk more about this later if you want, is which my book is about meaningfulness, right? Because if we chase happiness, it's very fleeting, and meaningfulness sustains time, and it becomes part of our legacy. So it's important, why we do what we do. But to answer your question, yes, some were happy, but many were not. And they taught me that, and I wish I learned this just solely from my family, but I actually really solidified with Hollywood that like family is the most important thing. They told me that your relationships you have are the most important thing. So I think about, like my relationships, like, wow, how valuable this is. Some of my greatest assets are the people in my life.
Family becomes very difficult when one person has hundreds of millions of dollars and the others don't, because there is an expectation. And even if you buy the parents a house, then it's like, well, you didn't furnish it. And now I need a maid. And now you need to pay my heat bill because I can't afford the heat bill. It's a constant gimme, gimme, gimme a lot of times. And so it becomes a difficult line to walk and to kind of navigate through that.
I agree. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I didn't leave out is many of these celebrities have purchased many homes for family members, have purchased their cars. And what comes with that? The stress and the burden of doing so because these families, they have $1 million home. Most of them cannot afford the taxes. So let's not even talk about the upkeep. Just the simple tax of that home alone is a burden. So then they're paying the taxes. So it is. So a lot of times they feel like every time they pick up the phone and someone's calling them or sending them a text, it's because they need something, right? And then you become someone's caretaker and no longer just a relative or a family member. And that's a difficult thing to navigate as well, especially because a lot of people feel entitled, right? You're successful, so you should be taking care of me. And it's like, well, it's one thing to give someone money. It's another to basically have to take care of their entire life, right? And pay their bills and manage their needs. Most people didn't sign up for that, nor are prepared for it.
No, it's a very difficult line to walk. And yeah, I don't envy them,
Yeah, and I will
you
say
know?
this for any of my relatives out there listening to this, I don't have hundreds of millions. So don't listen to Rocky. I don't know what he might have been telling you guys, but just be happy with the TV or whatever I've given you in the past, a free book or something. And but there's not hundreds of millions stashed away.
So at some point you decided to be a therapist. That's a massive shift. What brought that about?
So yeah, as I said, I really was in love with Hollywood because I wasn't from that. I wasn't cut from that rug. I come from blue collar, lower income working family. And when you talk, and you asked this earlier, and I left this part out, is I had 4 generations living in one home. So this was not like, we're living high on the hog. This is everyone's pulling their weight, trying to keep the ship afloat. But I loved Hollywood. Everything was going great in my life. I was just about to direct my first documentary. So I thought, wow, I finally made it. A press release came out. I think it was in the Hollywood Reporter or something, one of these things where I was like, oh my gosh, my name's in there. I've officially made it. Whether I have a bomb or not, I don't know. But right now I've officially made it. And I signed a deal to direct this movie. Within a week, my son has taken his life, my teenage son. So everything in my life was just immediately turned upside down. I went from being on the highest peak I thought possible at that time in my life down into the lowest valley. So, how the transition happened is the short of it is after being a recluse for a while, just to try to I just couldn't understand the gravity of what I just experienced losing my son. And after a bout with depression, I said, I gotta study psychology a little bit just on my own and try to understand why make sense of this. Why do people do what they do? And I still was not really functioning at 100%. And my sister, bless her soul, she kept pushing me to go to therapy. And she said, there's a group in the neighborhood, like a neighborhood next to my house, and said, you need to go. And I said, and I kept saying no. And then finally I said, if you will stop bothering me, I will go. But if I go once, that's it. So that was enough for her. So I went. And I didn't, and I'll be honest with you, and there was nothing wrong with the group and nothing wrong with the people in the group, but I didn't really get anything from it. In fact, I almost felt even heavier because I realized just the amount of suffering that people were going through because it was a group about people who lost people to suicide. But what I did gain from it is I really enjoyed the people. So like, there's a break in the group and they were all gravitating, not all of them, but a good amount of them were gravitating around me. And they said, "Oh, you have a different perspective. You tell jokes about your son and you're telling all these wonderful stories and it's not all doom and gloom." I was like, "Well, that's how I choose to remember him." And it was really interesting. And they said, "Are you going to come back to the next group?" And then I couldn't say no. I don't know why, but I just couldn't tell these people no. So I said, "Sure, I'll go to another group." One thing led to another. I wound up going to a couple groups. And then one day after group, a bunch of people wanted to go have coffee, which I don't drink, but I went out and I had my whatever it was, sparkling water or whatever I drink. And someone there said, "You should start your own group." I was like, "Wait a minute, I don't even want to be in a group to begin with, let alone the leader of a group." And then they said something even more provocative to me. And they said, "You should be a therapist. You're really good at talking and listening to people." And I thought, no way. I'm a creative type. I'm a Hollywood guy. Like this is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. But I went home that night and all I could think about was like, what would life be like if I was a therapist? I went to sleep. I woke up in the morning. I was like, yeah, I think this is my call. This is the best use of my time. I might be able to save some lives. I might be able to change some lives at least. And within 2 weeks, I was signed up to study psychology and pursued becoming a psychotherapist, which I am now today. And I write books on the side to reach a bigger audience. And that's how that happened. So when we talk about like my book is, it's F Happiness, the search for meaning, there was nothing happy about my journey to becoming a psychotherapist, though I thoroughly enjoy my life and I love helping people. The journey itself was not happy, but it was meaningful. And meaningfulness will get us through the hardest things in life. And at the end, these beautiful things happen through these journeys.
Why did you pick that title, F Happiness?
So this is a funny story, if you'll indulge me for a minute or two to tell it. So about 2 years ago, I had just finished promoting my book, Habits of Successful People, which is loosely based on my time in Hollywood from the interviews I did with different celebrities, of what they recommended for success, everything from exercise to eating healthy to using SMART goals and all these other things. And I was wondering what's next for me. And some of your listeners are probably thinking that right now, like in their life, is like, what's next for me? What's my next goal? What's the next mountain I want to conquer? What's the next finish line I want to cross? And I was thinking even deeper and I was thinking, what should I do? And then I was like, wait a minute, am I happy? For some reason, this thought was in my mind. And I was like, I couldn't answer that. Am I happy? And then I thought, well, if I can't answer that, I wonder if I'm even making my clients happy. And I couldn't answer that either. So, what does a psychotherapist and author do when they need information? They go to the almighty Google and you type in happiness into Google and you try to figure out what happiness is. Well, this really wonderful thing happened. Out of the millions of pages that were there was a movie recommended and it was called Hector and the Search for Happiness. And it caught my eye because it said the movie is about a psychotherapist who questions whether he's happy. And I thought, well, this is really weird. Like, is this like story about me? I'm questioning happiness. I'm a psychotherapist. And then the next line of the description says, and Hector questions whether he makes his patients happy. And I thought, all right, am I on like some kind of show where someone's going to kick open the door and be like, we got you, we got you. It's not real. We just heard what you're talking about. And I was like, this is my life. I have to watch this movie. So I watched the movie and I won't tell your listeners about it because I want them to watch this movie. It is wonderful. But after the movie was done, I was happy. I was elated. I was bursting with joy. I was like, I know what I'm going to do next. Like I had this epiphany. I'm going to research happiness and write a book about happiness. So I spent the next year starting that night. I opened up my laptop, started the first page, the title page, and I put in happiness as a working title. And I spent the next year researching and writing about happiness. Well, a year passes. As I always do, I print out the manuscript. So it comes out and there it says happiness on the cover page. And I'm reading it and I get note and I have my pen in hand because I always like to make some notes in the margin before I send it off to the editor. And I can't even get through the first chapter and I have a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something's wrong. Happiness isn't the answer. I've got this all wrong. And now I'm getting frustrated because I just spent a year researching happiness, wrote a book about happiness, and I can't support this idea, this notion that we should be chasing happiness. So out of frustration, I wrote the F word over happiness on the manuscript and threw it down on my desk. Well, when I came back, I looked at it and I was like, it was like it was epiphany. I got like like hit by lightning. It was like, that's what I need to be researching. It's not about happiness. In fact, I'm going to talk about why happiness isn't the answer and why meaningfulness is the answer. And when I thought about Hector and the Search for Happiness, that movie should actually be called Hector and the Search for Meaning, because what Hector actually found was meaning. And I was like, meaningfulness is the answer. So it took me a year of my life writing a book that is never going to be released to come up with that title.
So what does meaning mean?
Okay, so first let's look at happiness. So I'm not anti-happiness. I think everyone should enjoy moments of happiness. I think it's great, but we shouldn't chase it. Meaning is something deeper. I'll give you a funny scenario that everyone could understand. Really simple. Happiness is ordering a pizza. It shows up to your front door in 30 minutes or less. It's hot. You open up the box. It looks beautiful. It tastes beautiful. You enjoy it. But 30 minutes later, you're wondering what's for dessert and what's on Netflix. Happiness is fleeting. It's very momentarily. So let's use the pizza as an example again. Now take that same exact pizza. Now have that pizza with close friends, your partner, your spouse, dear colleagues, sharing deep, meaningful connections. Where that first pizza, you were happy, but you're not going to think about it in the future. Maybe if you order pizza again, you'll say, well, they did a good job. I'll order from them. But there's no deep meaning to that. But that conversation you had with your friends over that pizza, you're going to remember that a day later, a week later, a month later, maybe even a year or 10 years later. You're going to remember how they made you feel and how you made them feel. That's the difference between happiness and meaning. Meaning serves a greater good. It has a legacy to it.
So how do people find meaning?
That's a great question. First, if I could rewind a little bit, let's first look at what everyone is chasing right now. Not everyone, but many of your listeners are probably chasing or have chased and realize that it's unfulfilling. So let's first talk about happiness and then I'll segue to meaning because I think it's an important kind of thing to understand. So happiness is detrimental to finding meaning because what happens is with happiness, people look at other people who are happy and they say to themselves, what am I doing wrong? What is wrong with me? Why am I not as happy as them? Why am I not enjoying life as much as them? So, where does this come from? Well, I would assert there's two major things, components that why we are chasing happiness. One is advertising and marketing, right? This is no surprise probably to your listeners, right? So advertisers and marketers are these, I call them these slick weasels who weave these magical tales of how their products and services are going to change our life for the better and make us happy, right? What's the second thing then that we're battling? Is something that we've really only battled in the last 2 decades in this form, and that's social media. So you have all these curated moments of happiness that aren't real. It's not to say all photos aren't real or all moments aren't real, because I'm sure someone who posts their wedding photos on a social media probably really did enjoy it. It probably has meaning. But there's a lot of other photos of very dysfunctional families that look happy, but they're not happy at all. They're not having a meaningful life. They don't get along. They don't talk. They go out to dinner and they sit with their faces in those phones and they don't share quality time. So social media, has these curated moments that we're trying to live up to. And again, that's very fleeting. Um, what happens is people are constantly trying to consume things to make themselves happy. And it's just unsustainable. And there's something called the hedonic treadmill that happens. And this is where it's a psychological phenomenon. Well, we return to our baseline of happiness, a good or bad, after making a purchase or something happens to us. So what does this mean? This means that new promotion, that corner office, that new car that you just bought, that really sporty car that's so awesome, before you make that first car payment, that happiness is going to be gone. You're going to be back to your baseline before you purchased it. So happiness is this very empty, fleeting thing. So now so let's switch to meaning. Deeply connects us to what we're doing. It's a journey, it's a process. So if you think about my time in Hollywood, we can just go back to that. And it was meaningful to me. Yes, there were moments of happiness, of course, high-fiving someone on the red carpet. My mom sees me on TV. That's awesome, right? But the meaningfulness comes from the relationships that I had, that the people who became friends, the people who became mentors, the people that I could lift up. Mostly they were doing the lifting because they were more powerful and financially stable and they were big names, right? But that was the meaningfulness, was the learning, the growing, and the experience. And a lot of times with happiness, we're more concerned about, again, the photo of what we're doing than actually being in the moment of what we're doing. So many people are worried about taking that picture of that dinner. How about just engage with the people you're eating dinner with and just really savor that meal? Is it really about but to many people, it's more about how the photo looks than the actual experience. I need to capture a really great photo so everyone sees how wonderful my life is. And it's like, well, you're missing the point because it's about the journey.
And you don't actually need anything for meaning, do you?
Hmm.
In the sense of it's just about letting go.
So there is some of that, yeah. So when we think about meaning, okay, so here's the other thing about meaning, which I probably left a big component out of it, and I talk about this in the book, is to really understand meaning in life. And this is what in the book, this book is different than my previous book. My previous book, I was telling people what to do. You should do these things. Just listen to me and do them, and your life will be better. That was in Habits of Successful People, right? Do these steps, follow ABC, and you will get a reward. You will get some improvement in your life. This book of happiness is totally different, where I'm saying to the reader or the listener of the audiobook that question yourself. What is the main question I ask in the book? And the main thing I want people to walk away with is, what is your authentic self? So, how can you have meaning in life if we don't understand who our authentic self is? So, if you really think about, we talked about this briefly about school. You asked the question about school. So, think about our school system. From a young age, we're taught to line up, act a certain way, walk a certain way, sit a certain way, raise your hand, which isn't necessarily bad, but and then they're no longer teaching us how to think, they're telling us what to think, right? So we have these people that are not living their own narrative. Now we're conditioned to act and be a certain way. So many people are going through life, and that's where a lot of this discomfort, anxiety, depression, and other things come from, is they aren't living an authentic life. They're not living their own narrative. I don't know how many of your listeners are out there going, were you the good kid or were you the bad kid? Were you the smart brother or the dumb brother? Were you the good sister or the bad sister, right? So we have all these roles that are assigned to us, and that becomes our narrative often. And people don't take the time later in life to go, wait, is this really my narrative? And what is my authentic needs? So part of meaningfulness is the only way to find true meaning is to be authentic to yourself. So to really look at what motivates you. So one of the things I would recommend to the listeners is I really suggest journaling to people. And if you don't want to journal, just take out a sheet of paper, use the notes on your phone or whatever, is ask yourself, what are your core beliefs? And a lot of people can't answer that. If you ask them, what are your core beliefs? They look at you and go, what are you talking about? You know? So a lot of people are disconnected from that. And it's like, well, how do you make decisions in life if you don't know what your core beliefs are? And that's why so many people are at odds with their life, and they're kind of living this paradox because they're doing things that aren't necessarily fitting in with their core beliefs. A perfect example of that is you could look at this weird dichotomy as like there are people who understand money and understand finance, but yet they keep sinking themselves into credit card debt every month, even though they know they shouldn't, right? This is what a strange dichotomy, right? It's like, no, review what your authentic self is. Having stability and financial health and wellness is important. You wouldn't keep doing that. So you've got to remind yourself of, like, these are my core values and I should live according to those core values. Again, it's not what I'm telling the listeners they should have as core values. Ask yourself what your core values are, because that's how you're going to have a meaningful life. Because for some people, having this wonderful portfolio is going to be a meaningful life because that's their joy and their love and it's survival. Some people it's a hobby investing, some it's a career, but that has to be a personal choice based on what your core values are, what your characteristics are. So that's really important. The other thing is with having meaningfulness, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up it's really important to have strong relationships. No one can all be, we all should be the captains of our own ship. But with that being said, we all need a crew in life. I really do believe this. Very few things are done by individuals. There are some wonderful things that have been done by individuals, but most of us, we work best in groups and surround ourselves with really good people. Again, people that share the same core values, people that are uplifting, that are also authentic. Because when they're authentic and we're authentic, guess what we get to do? We get to be vulnerable with each other. So you can't be vulnerable if you don't know who you are. Because what is vulnerability? Because you don't even know who you are. So how can you share your authentic self? And so I think that's really important too when we're searching for meaning, is know what our authentic self is, have meaningful relationships, and go out in the world and find these adventures, what you love and what you're passionate about.
Why do you think most people don't define their core values?
Well, because we've been set in motion by so many other people before us. Whether your parents are good, bad, or indifferent, they did what they thought was right, or they raised us a certain way, and that has a huge influence in who we are. Whether we believe in ourselves, whether we have imposter syndrome, whether we're confident, we're not confident. Even if they had the best intentions, we could still just have issues with some of those areas in life. So again, things are set in motion and we just tend to go with it, right? Because we know inertia is not a good thing. So just keep moving, keep moving. Well, but if we're doing the same thing over and over again and we're not getting the results we want, that's insanity, isn't it? I mean, so right, like listen, if we know we have to make money, that's one thing, but if every day we go out and we make money, but we're miserable, something's got to change. We have to find another way of making money or find something else that's going to offset doing something that we don't really enjoy to bring us meaningfulness in life. And most people don't question that. We're not really taught that. And that's the other thing is we should be, you talk about school and why aren't we teaching people to be in tune with themselves? Why don't we teach people about narrative? That's really important, because our narrative is going to change and it should change because, as human beings, we want to grow, right? That's a wonderful thing is growth.
And I agree with that. And you have a line in the book that kind of summarizes this: unshackle yourself from society's chains and venture into the realm of true success, one defined by personal growth, well being, and genuine connections. And we talk about that a lot. You have to have purpose, you have to adjust your mindset, you have to be healthy, and you've got to have whatever your spiritual purpose is, and you have to define what you want. Because if you don't define your destination, it is so hard to stay on course because you are constantly pulled off course.
I thoroughly agree with you, Rocky. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. In fact, I wish I would have quoted myself because that would probably have been a shorter answer to your question earlier. So thank you for that. You just upstaged me with my own words. But no, I agree. And one thing when we were talking about, you asked the question of why people don't change or why they aren't able to be authentic or why they keep continuing on the same path. Another reason we do this is the fear of judgment. So if you think about this, at one time we were all part of tribes, right? Not in our lifetime, but well, in some ways we are, but
You were.
we were literally part of tribes, right? And back in the day, if you didn't follow what the tribe was doing, you'd starve, you'd freeze to death, you'd be attacked or taken over or something, right?
I would say that your little neighborhood in Chicago was a tribe.
Yeah, that's why I corrected myself because the more I thought about it, I was like, it was a tribe, right? But one of the big things that I think is important too for finding authenticity and meaningfulness in life, and you just made me think of this as well, is the fear of judgment. So again, I talk about this in the book where why can't people be authentic? Well, we're afraid of being judged, right? So there's a couple things to help with the fear of judgment. If I can, just walk people through these, I think this is important. And So one is recognizing, as I mentioned before, that social media and advertisements are just these curated ideas to sell us products and ideas that aren't necessarily needed. But as far as fear of judgment, really practice self-compassion. One of the things is we are some of our own worst critics. So I talked about our narrative that was set in motion by other people. Well, often we reinforce this in ourselves, right? And we keep telling ourselves like, I'm no good at this. I can't do this. And it's like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Well, if you think you can't do it, you're not going to be able to do it. That's just how it is. So have self-compassion. I think the other thing is, this goes back to school as well. What is school give you a star for? Doing something perfect. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to challenge the idea of perfectionism because we're missing this great opportunity to learn. Dale Carnegie thought the same thing and expressed it that, sometimes falling down is one of the greatest lessons in life. We get up and we're stronger and we do things differently and we learn and grow from it. Again, with the fear of judgment is if we do have healthy relationships, we're less likely to feel that we don't fit in, right? Like, hey, people do like me for who I am and what I have to offer. And that reinforces this. And we're less likely to fear making a statement or sharing advice or growing or accepting opportunity. The other thing is that with the fear of judgment, often we let constructive criticism destroy us. So there are like, listen, if someone, gets upset with you in traffic and yells at you and calls you a bunch of names, don't internalize that. That person's just upset. You made a mistake, whatever. That has nothing to do with who you are at your core. But if someone does pull you aside and gives you constructive criticism and says, hey, listen, I think, you could improve in this way or that, take it, accept it, evaluate it and see if it's it's an opportunity for growth. And don't let it make you stop doing what you're doing. Again, like I said, challenge the idea of perfection. We're not perfect. It's like life is a learning experience. Wisdom isn't gained in a book, right? Wisdom is gained through time. And that's also requires falling down, making mistakes, learning from them and growing. So I think that fear of judgment is a big thing that I do talk about in the book and is important for people to be authentic and to really to find meaning. Because if I'm pretending to be someone else because that's what's acceptable, I'm not authentic and I'm not living a meaningful life. I'm living someone else's life.
Have you had any ahas since the book came out?
That's a really good question. I have to think about that a little bit. I had more ahas in the process. Like I said, I think I so so here I'll answer this in a roundabout way. So one of the reasons I write books is not just for the reader. And I know that sounds terrible. Like I should write books so that because I want to solely help people, and I do, I truly do. But I write books for myself first. I feel there's a lesson I need to learn. Those aha moments for me are often throughout the process of writing the book where I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been doing this for years. I got to stop doing this, or I'm doing this right, right? So I do have those aha moments. And one of them was the fear of judgment. I realized, like, here I am. I lived this life where I was, in the limelight and on the red carpets and in front of people asking for lots of money or whatever, or to invest in somebody else. And I felt comfortable doing it, but yet how much better could I have been at my job or better my experience could have been if I didn't have such a fear of judgment? Because I was really struggling with that. So that was an aha moment in this book where I was like, wow, I need to fully embrace who I am at some point in my life. I'm not getting any younger. I don't know if the listeners are going to be able to see me on video or not, but I'm not getting any younger, and none of us are. And at some point in my life, I would like to know that I'm 100% comfortable with who I am. So I think the other aha moment I had was that I I am okay, and it's really sad because it should only be internally. Like I should know I'm okay just internally, like because I'm hitting my core values, I'm doing what I believe in. But when my girlfriend Anna said something about the book and how proud of me she was and how it's changing people's lives, and she's listening, to the audio of it, and I was like, yeah, you know what? Talking about the aha, I was like, I'm not that bad of a person. I need to stop fearing judgment as much. Like I'm so worried about what people are going to think. No, I need to free this. This is something I need to work on myself. And so that's an aha moment as well. There's always something, even though I'm the one putting the words on paper, am I practicing it? Or am I getting lazy with it or something of that nature? Those are ahas as well, to stay on track and kind of keep myself in check. Because we can become complacent in life at times.
Always back to centering. And I think on this journey, it's hard to have a good comparator because the world doesn't show a good comparator. It shows a marketing comparator, not an enlightened person who's peaceful, hanging out and happy every moment of the day. Like, you don't see them anywhere in the sense of they're not on Facebook and Instagram and all of that, because that would probably take them away from their bliss. And
Mhm.
so it's hard to see what that looks like. And I think the other half of it is, in that case, you have to make sure you're not following their path. You have to pick your own path because it's your journey, not theirs. And I think too often we see someone's journey and we want to have that journey, and that's not us. And I think that's the other part of the problem.
I agree. And that goes back to, like I said, those curated moments of happiness, right? When we're looking at other people, this goes back. When I was researching this, it's kind of funny because this has been going on for millennia, but the idea of keeping up with the Joneses came out in 1913. We're 100 and some years later, and we're still talking about keeping up with the Joneses. How many generations have gone by, and we're still doing the same thing? And that goes exactly what you're saying, Rocky, is like, if we're looking at what someone else has or what their path is or whatever that is, that's not meant to be our path. That's their path. And whether it's real or not or imagined, that's not the path we're supposed to be on. Like, let's learn from other people. I think that's great. Hey, wow, they got a great technique. They got some great visions. I'll learn from them, but their path is not my path. And I agree with that. And I think that's, again, going back to authenticity and meaningfulness, right? Because how can I have a meaningful life if I'm living Rocky's path, which is probably an awesome path? Um, I'm not living my path then.
And I think sometime in my piece, I came to the realization that nobody can compete against me because I'm living my path. And if you're following my path, you don't have it the way I do it, right? You're not true to it. You might be doing something to compete, but you're really not, because you're following the wrong direction. You're doing things the wrong way for you. And that's one of the biggest things. I've always been somewhat of an outlier with that. I go my own direction, and I'm not afraid to say so bluntly many times, which is not always good, but I don't care.
No, that's awesome. I like that. I like, do your own thing, be your own person. One of the things I tell people in the book too is celebrate your uniqueness. Like, don't try to be different for the sake of being different, but celebrate your uniqueness. If you really think about some of the change in the world, you think about everything from, we're talking like early Walt Disney, Jonas Salk. We're talking about Viktor Frankl. We're talking about Martin Luther King, talking about Paul McCartney of the Beatles. These people, Steve Jobs, these people were doing things differently. They didn't do everything just like someone else did it. They cut their own path. They took a lot of risks. I mean, look at Jonas Salk, for goodness sakes. He's testing the vaccine on himself. Like, this person really believed in themselves. They're taking their own path and they're going to do what they believe is right. In fact, including taking his own path, where when you talk about measuring up to other people, Jonas Salk could have easily said, well, I want to patent this vaccine so I could become a millionaire, and then I can be, next to this person or above this person or equal to this person. No, he said, no, it's free. Here's the vaccine. Like, that's different thinking. That changes the world. And it did change the world. That's amazing. So again, celebrate your uniqueness. I think, and that's only found through new paths, right? There's still new paths to be traveled.
So true. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Gratefulness. I think when I'm grateful and when I remind myself how grateful I should be, I come from a really good position of having enough and not needing more than I already have. So I think gratefulness is really a great guiding light for me. And it brings me from a place of fulfillment and brings me away from that fear of scarcity.
What did you learn later in life that you should have learned sooner?
That I'm good enough, that I'm worthy, that I do have value. And I don't think I felt that as a child, and I don't think I felt that into my early 20s. I think it took later in life. In fact, didn't fully believe it until after losing my son, studying psychology and understanding why. So we talk about narrative earlier and stuff like that. And I didn't really truly believe that I was a worthwhile human being.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
It would go back to what I said in the book. I'm really big on authenticity. Question everything. Find out who you really are. Find out what really sets you on fire, what you're passionate about, and pursue that with vigor.
People would like to learn more about you in the book. Where can they find you?
So to find the book, go to Amazon.com, and that's the best place to find F Happiness or any of my previous books. The best website to follow me if you want to find out a little bit of my history of Hollywood, as well as what I'm currently working on, the books I'm releasing, or any other creative projects I have working. That's Shawn Leon Nowotnik. So it's ShawnLeonNowotnik. And that would be a great place to follow up. And then you can even follow what I'm doing with therapy and where I work and stuff like that.
Awesome. We will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.